Alright, Atma here. I was going to do a little meta-analysis. It's kind of a lecture. We're just going to talk a little bit about how you approach dealing with Magic Duels metas, and the current one as it is, equipped with graphs. So here's the meta breakdown as I've encountered it over just a shit ton of games. So it's mostly mid-range, and it's always mostly mid-range because mid-range runs the gamut from like Abzan based like Advocate, Tracker, Planeswalker decks to weird token strategies to Thopters, Bant. There's just a ton of things that just make up mid-range. Mid-range just means it's not all in fast and it's not killing that many things. Mid-range is a toolbox. Mid-range is I've got some creatures, I've got some things that work good in the meta, presumably, and I've got some kills. I've got some answers. So the whole thing with mid-range is mid-range is the default from when you start with something. Like you start with aggro, but then you're like, I need more answers. So you become slower, you take out all-in creatures, and it becomes a mid-range deck. And control, sometimes you're like, this control is just not really working out. I need to just put some blockers in, and those blockers just become creatures, and those creatures feel like mid-range. Control is just trying to have very few win conditions, but making sure that you get there, that you make sure your few win conditions happen. And in this case, it's usually planeswalkers, but it's also taken the form of burn, just burn. And ramp is actually a very small part of the meta, which is, I mean, good for me because I hate playing against dumb ramp. I call it dumbass ramp, where you just ramp, Ulamog. Anybody that watches my videos knows I hate that type of ramp. But right now, control is way more popular than it's ever been, in contrast to ramp being less popular than it's ever been, which is interesting because the slower you are, the better ramp is. The more you can sit around and take entire turns off casting Nissa's Pilgrimage or Explosive Vegetation because you're not playing creatures, so control's not killing anything, the more, if you can take turns off to ramp, then you're going to get to your Ulamog faster. You're going to get to dirtle around and do your own little ramp thing without getting punished. When aggro is a much bigger piece of this pie, then ramp gets punished. Right now, control's in a weird place because out of the large chunk of the meta that is control right now, which is mostly 4 and 5 color planeswalkers, Esper control. A huge portion of it is blue-red tutelage or blue-red spells. That's sometimes the same deck. I think it's a little bit better if you go heavier in one direction or the other, but I know there's a lot of decks out there hedging both sides and they still work. This is most of the control decks I've faced have been that. So if you actually consider 33% of the decks I've played are control, and 53% of that is blue-red control, then you realize that just this one fringe archetype is actually a gigantic chunk of the meta. It is the most common deck you will face. People love it. It steals some free wins with some busted draws, kind of like aggro does, except it's not. It does try and kill everything first and burn last. And tutelage is really popular right now because delirium and self-mill strategies are very popular right now. So when your opponent is milling themselves, then tutelage milling just mills them even faster. Like, you either accelerate them into their win condition or they just run out of cards. And more often than not, they run out of cards. So the solution for that is Reclamation Sage when you're on the other side. Like, obviously, Reclamation Sage is going to be an answer to tutelage. It's an enchantment. Enchantments are difficult to interact with, and this is a creature that interacts with it, and then they'll burn it because it has 1 toughness, and you'll get a 2-for-1 out of it. And most importantly, you'll kill the tutelage. And the other half of that deck is burn, which means your life total is very important. And while gaining life doesn't win you the game, a card like Pulse of Marasa will get your Reclamation Sage out of the graveyard and give you 6 life and kill their second tutelage, or in fact kill their Visions. I don't know why the name of that card's escaping me, but Visions of Brutality or something. Anyway, when they are running 5 enchantments, Reclamation Sage is going to be better than it's ever been. Tutelage decks were very popular when Origins was the only set in Magic Duels, but it's very popular again because Delirium is popular again, or Delirium is popular, and therefore Reclamation Sage and Pulse of Marasa are just the absolute most premium cards to deal with this meta, because you're killing their visions and you're killing their tutelage and you're gaining life. So the response to the giant chunk of this pie that you have to deal with is these 2 cards. But are they dead against the other 61% of cards? That's the question. Because even though that's a fairly high percentage, you could say 15 or 16% of the total decks that you'll face are going to be that deck, it's worth considering putting that in your deck. But is it just dead to the 61% of non-control decks? Well, it's not, because it hits Reclamation Sage, hits Angelic Destiny, it hits Infectious Bloodlust, and it hits Call of the Full Moon, which fall into the aggro color pie, in white and red aggro specifically. And Pulse of Marasa deals with all manner of burn to the face spells and non-exile kill spells to get your creatures back. So that interacts very favorably against burn. They burn and kill your guy, you gain 6 life, and you get your guy back. All that burn isn't going to your face, and you gain 6 life, so they have to burn even more. The hidden factor is they have to dig and dig and dig and find more and more burn spells, which means you start 2, 3, 4-for-1ing them with 1 cast of Pulse of Marasa that gets a creature that they have to kill back. It becomes pretty insane against, a red aggro deck that's trying to burn and attack, and you're just going to block, and your guy's going to die, and you get it back, and you gain 6 life. It's crippling. But the next thing you have to ask yourself when you're in a control-heavy meta, like, even though mid-range is the most dominant or the most prevalent, that's just because there's the most decks. But I would say this is a control meta. So what gets punished in a control-heavy meta? Well, fast decks that are too slow to beat 5-mana board wipes. So decks that are like mono red aggro, they're just too... They're fine, but a lot of people are playing the things that beat them. But they're just fast enough to beat a 5-mana board wipe, which makes them viable. But if you're going to play, say, Bant mid-range without counter spells or without Pulse of Marasa, then you're going to be too slow. So decks like Bant mid-range that run things like Spell Shrivel, Spell Queller, Selfless Spirit, Tireless Tracker, Duskwatch Recruiter, that deck is actually good, but you have to be considerate of the fact that it is too slow. It is actually too slow to beat control. So you have to put things in Bant midrange in order to combat a control-heavy meta, because those types of decks that just have a bunch of creatures are just going to get killed and killed and killed and killed. But when you add Reclamation Sage against the control decks and Pulse of Marasa against the aggro decks, suddenly Bant midrange, which has a bunch of really good creatures, suddenly fights in the meta. That's really the whole point of this video, is just to show that You identify 2 cards that clearly are good in the meta, and you find a deck that it goes in, that it seems good but isn't quite getting there, and then all of a sudden it starts getting there. Now, aggro is usually heavily popular, but when it's some marginal amount less popular like it is now, what are the implications? Well, the implication is that you can take entire turns off to ramp. Like, not every game, because you're going to come up against aggro and you're going to probably lose a lot of the time as ramp. But ramp beats control. In the rock, paper, scissors matchup, if you just disregard mid-range toolbox, aggro is supposed to beat ramp, and ramp's supposed to beat control, and control is supposed to beat aggro. Like, that's a really obviously simplified way of putting it, because that's obviously not 100% true, but on average it's true. Like, in stock builds of any given meta, that's just a true statement. And decks are rebuilt in order to combat the things that are fighting them better. So control will tend to have to deal with ramp in a certain way if ramp becomes popular for dealing with it, which it is not right now, which is why people are just doing the same controlling blue-red spells thing all the time. If burn control is so popular, as it is, what are the actual implications in what we're dealing with now? It means that 4 toughness creatures will make the following spells just dead in their hand very often. Fiery Impulse is dead against 4 toughness unless they interact with it with another thing. And if they interact with it with another thing, that's a 2-for-1, which is a fine trade usually. Fiery Temper. Galvanic Bombardment, they need 2 other Galvanic Bombardments in the graveyard in order to make that happen. Touch of the Void, Twin Bolt, and Fringe Spatial Contortion all don't kill 4 toughness things. Now, 4 toughness things are good in a meta that's trying to burn, and all this burn is seen in that deck. Now, they do have 2 different spells that do 4 and 5 damage that will still be able to hit that. But if you can blank all this other removal as much as you can, then you're going to have a better chance of fighting them. So, all things considered, what are the best creatures to deal with this meta? Well, in white, you have Avacyn, Linvala, and Bruna. In blue, you have Disciple of the Ring, Jorubai Murklurker, which I want to note, I've seen 0 play of, and I haven't even made a deck with it, but I know for a fact it's good in this meta, because it gains life, and it has 4 toughness. And Thing in the Ice, which of course is just seen in those decks anyway, because they have a ton of spells. Elusive Tormentor, Titan of Erebos, Kalitas, which gains life, is also significant right now, and Vampire Envoy. Now, Vampire Envoy doesn't really go in that many decks, and it's only a 1/4. It seems really lame, and I'm not saying that you should use it, but consider that it can't be killed by very many things in that particular deck. It blocks pretty well, and it gains life when it gets tapped. So you attack for 1, you gain a life. Well, every time you gain a life on a thing that they can't kill, they're getting further and further behind. So it's actually a reasonable option if you can figure out how to use it. And maybe adding it to a black-red vampires deck while making that deck slower isn't the dumbest idea, necessarily. I mean, I have not done that in my vampires, but it's worth considering. In red, there's, of course, way less options. Mirrorwing Dragon, Wolf of Devil's Breach, which see very fringe play in their mythics anyway, but Vile Aggregate's worth considering because you can use it in an Eldrazi deck. Green, of course, has the most 4 toughness things. Dwynnin, Green Warden of Mirasa, Ishkana. Those 2 cards in particular see tons of play. Moldgraph Scavenger in the Delirium deck. Woodland Wanderer is actually excellent right now and has always been excellent because it tramples, which makes it one of the biggest threats against Planeswalkers because they usually just play their Gideon, they have a 2/2, and now you have a 5/5 or a 6/6 trampling over. It's very good. Woodland Bellower, of course, is great. It adds like 10 power to the board. Sylvan Advocate and Tireless Tracker don't start out at 4 toughness, but they get there. So they're worth adding. And then there's a variety of Eldrazi and 2-colored spells that also have 4 toughness. This list of creatures here that have 4 toughness are just valuable to have in, I mean, some of them anyway, are valuable to have in a deck when you're trying to fight in this meta, because they'll reliably not die to a lot of things. Now, of course, there's Languish and Grasp of Darkness and Murder and a lot of things that will deal with it, but when we're talking about fighting, 15 or 18% of a meta, these are going to be all very good creatures. They'll stick around. They'll do something. They'll 2-for-1, or they'll cause some odd play some percentage of the time. Not every time, but some percentage of the time, which is all you're asking for, is an incremental advantage at the right given time in a game. And you never know when that is because there's variance. So the conclusions that are to be had here based on that information are, because blue-red tutelage and blue-red spells are popular decks, the best color in the meta is green, obviously, because it has the biggest creatures with toughness, and it has Pulse of Marasa, and it has Reclamation Sage. There's no denying that while you can win a ton of games playing a variety of decks, especially if you've built them right, just when you consider the meta alone, just on average, your better draws are going to have green spells in them. That's just a fact. There's actually not even an argument about it. Like, if you're not just doing what the meta is doing, if you're trying to beat the meta or toolbox, if you're trying to mid-range, you should always have green. Now, further conclusions, because ramp is so much less common, your aggro decks don't need to be just fast, they need protection, because they're fighting control now. When ramp was, when it was Acid Moss ramp, all you had to do was be mono red, or you had to be blue-green or blue-white flyers with 2-drops. Just 1-drop, 2-drop, 1-drop, 2-drop, 1-drop, 2-drop. And you didn't have to worry about protecting your guys. That's why Infectious Bloodlust, you could just put all the enchantments in the world on your things and just go to town, go ham. And it didn't matter ever. But now you need to have a whole bunch of things like an Avacyn protection or Selfless Spirit or something like that to protect your aggro deck from control. Or just counter spells even. You just have Unsubstantiate in your aggro deck. And because Abzan is the most popular mid-range toolbox, because it has access to Rec Sage, Pulse of Marasa, Sylvan Advocate, Tireless Tracker, and most of the best Planeswalkers, you're going to have to consider the fact that you need to be able to beat that. So those are the conclusions that you need to reach, is that you got to beat Abzan by not just burning. You have to make sure your aggro decks have protection against control, and you have to fight against tutelage. So the conclusion based on all that stuff is that you should have, well, I mean, it's almost like me saying you should just play Abzan, because you get a toolbox deck that has green in it and ways to gain life. But in the great rock, paper, scissors game, that we're talking about, where you're trying to make one deck fight another, I'll give you some examples of what I'm talking about. So if you're building an aggro deck, you gotta be fast enough to beat the 4 mana board wipe, because that just beats you. That's the whole point of like mono red aggro, or even prowess. Like, you just have to be fast enough to where that 5 mana board wipe's not gonna matter for whatever reason. Whether it's because they're so low that your burn spell will kill them, or because you have haste guys to finish them off, or whatever, for whatever reason you beat it. You just need to be fast enough to beat it. And because tutelage cares about monocolor, it is better to be blue-red prowess than mono-red, because you'll get milled less on average. And because people run Pulse of Marasa, it's nice to have counter spells. Just in case they're trying to get that 6 life right at the end. You know, you go for that last attack and they're like, Pulse of Marasa, gotcha, and you get them. So it's nice to have an Unsubstantiate in that particular deck. But then you'd wonder, well, Atma, What about the meta solutions you talked about? Like, what are we supposed to do with the information? Well, you just add 4 toughness creatures. So you can add Thought Not Seer and Reality Smasher and Vile Aggregate. And 2, you can build out your deck with complements to that change in strategy with Thopter Makers that buff Aggregate, and colorless mono things like Spatial Contortion, or the activation on Eldrazi Obligator. That deck becomes red Eldrazi. It's no longer red aggro. It's a mid-range deck. It's been toolboxed a little bit. It's not a solution to everything, but this is the evolution that I'm talking about. Similarly, when you play white and white-green humans, they can't really beat board wipes, so you need a lot of solutions for board wipes. For example, Topan Freeblade plus the Renown counter plus Nimbus Wings, which helps it get that Renown counter, makes it a 4/5, so it beats Languish. Often you'll go 1-drop into Topan Freeblade, into whatever, and then you're like holding your breath on that turn 4. But if you play a threat or 2 and make your Topan Freeblade into a 4/5, then they get to board wipe 1 or 2 of your things, but your Topan Freeblade survives, which means they have to take an additional turn to deal with it, which means one way or the other you get more damage in. This is very important, is to make their catch-all threats not catch-all. In addition to that, adding Selfless Spirit and Make a Stand will beat Planar Outburst. So if you can fight around their little Languish stuff, that's all cool. But if you just have things that just make them kill Selfless Spirit before they can Planar Outburst, or they don't even see Make a Stand coming and you just get them, then you just get them. Now Spirits is another deck, and it has flyers, and they're tough to interact with on the ground. But those decks are just losing to blue-red spells, and they're just losing to Languish because the toughness on the Spirits is so low that they just get killed by every burn spell, and they get swept away by Languish so easily, and Selfless Spirit doesn't even help them. And then you wonder, well, Atma, what about those meta solutions you were talking about earlier? You fixed me up on red aggro. What am I supposed to do with that information? Well, I was thinking you just like combine your white decks. So you crossbreed the similarities between the 2 decks and make a critical mass of higher value creatures from all 3 variations. Selfless Spirits, Topan Freeblade, Spell Queller, Tireless Tracker, Counter Spells. Now that you aren't just humans or spirits, you can go ahead and add elves like Sylvan Advocate and Nissa's Vastwood Seer. Now you have access to green, so you can Rex Sage and Pulse of Marasa. It becomes Bant midrange, which is midrange, but you've toolboxed again. So that's the way you fight the meta. Not to say that like the aggro variations that I've listed are necessarily worse or better than what they become, but when you're fighting the meta, when you're trying to make the thing that beats the most amount of things on average, those are the kinds of things you end up doing. And more often than not, they become mid-range. When these types of evolutions take place, the format slows down. Since mid-range is designed to be a toolbox of value and answers, it slows the format down. Because when you play something and it's answered, neither of you are actually doing anything proactively. All that's happened is somebody did something and they were stopped from doing something, and that stop slows down the format. Slower formats allow you to go bigger, and thus ramp gets better. So that's kind of where we're at now, where ramp is better than it could be under like normal circumstances where people just love playing aggro and you can just aggro out the people trying to go big. Abzan and Bant are trying to toolbox against tutelage, spells, and planeswalkers, and therefore they're slowing everything down. And those decks that they're fighting against are control decks, which are already slow anyway, which allows ramp to do its thing. Now, of course, there's going to be mid-range straws that are just going to be fast randomly. It's just going to be advocate into tracker and do a bunch of things, and if you don't do anything, you're going to get screwed. But on average, they're not going to just have those rares ready to go. And of course, if you get turn 4 Gideoned, ramp is going to lose. But it's worth considering that that is the exact position that we're in right this second. And just because I figured we'd talk about the top 10 decks in the meta, in my opinion. Number 10 is Board Wipes and Walkers. So the whole thing with this is that it's 4 colors, it's 5 colors, it's Abzan. For whatever reason, all it cares about is winning with these Planeswalkers, and it's still good, but it's just slightly... It's still good. I don't even want to talk about it. You know, it's just annoying. It's annoying. Jund Walkers, the only reason I like this better is because it has burn. Like, it interacts favorably. This is the way I should say it. Exquisite Firecraft interacts better with Planeswalkers than Anguished Unmaking does, because Anguished Unmaking does 3 damage to you, and you're playing in a meta that burns a lot to the face. So if you're going to take 3 damage in a deck that's doing nothing but play Planeswalkers and value out, that's a high cost to pay without also gaining life. So I kind of prefer Jund because you can play some creatures, and you can play burn, and you can play trample guys, and you can play Pulse of Marasa. That a toolbox is a little bit better than I think Abzan like Control does. Number 8 is Esper Control, which actually has the same issue with Anguished Unmaking, but the thing it does better is it plays Sorin and Gideon, and Jund doesn't, and that's really the only difference. It doesn't have access to green, which I think is a huge problem, and I think that when Esper Control loses, it loses exclusively because it doesn't have green. The decks that play Esper plus green, which usually isn't Esper plus green, it's usually like green, blue, black plus white or something, whatever the 4-color variant, it actually has more answers, but the inconsistency in mana is just enough to make it worse. Blue-red Spells and Tutelage, despite the fact that I've talked about it a lot, isn't the best deck. It's not the best deck, but it is hugely prevalent, and it's quite good. So it is 7th, but it does lose. I've lost with mine. I've beaten it. I mean, it's 50-50 pretty much. Like my matchups against it, sometimes it's really bad, and I'm at about 52% or something against it, and my deck is about 55% wins. And chalk that up to whatever you want, variance, skill, who knows, but it's actually not hugely oppressive. It's just very common, and half of the draws are almost unbeatable, and half of them just don't get there. Number 6 is Red Eldrazi. I brought it up briefly previously in the video, and I think that it's good. It's just like a good deck. It has big creatures. It has burn. The toughness is relevant. It has haste. Like, it's strange, but this Red Eldrazi deck actually is just hugely successful in the meta right now, and it has a lot of things that aren't in a lot of other decks, and I think that's a huge benefit to it, and why it wins so much is people aren't really used to fighting against it, and it does just enough of the right things to win. Abzan midrange. This deck is the board wipes and walkers deck with less board wipes and more creatures, basically. It has, the Sylvan Advocate, Tireless Tracker, Woodland Bellower, Pulse of Marasa. The toolbox Abzan is one of the better decks in the format. It has access to green, it has access to ways to deal with planeswalkers, it has access to trample creatures, it has access to the best planeswalkers in the meta, and therefore it's one of the best decks. The reason it loses, I can't even explain. When I think back on the games I've lost with Abzan midrange, and it's quite a few, it's surprisingly not like oppressively dominant. I've always lost in the most inexplicably unfair ways, and I wonder if when I was playing that deck, if I was just unlucky or not. Like, I can't actually put my finger on it because it really felt like my opponents just had the perfect thing all the time. And so as a result, I can't really feel like it's the best deck, despite the fact that it feels like on paper it should be. Bant midrange I've had more success with. I think it's a little bit lower to the ground. It's a little bit faster, so it kind of finishes what it's doing a little bit quicker. Instead of winning with planeswalkers, it wins more with creatures and value. Tamiyo is a surprisingly good planeswalker. Tamiyo with creatures will either draw you a bunch of cards or finish the game off. The other thing I think about Bant midrange that makes it such a good deck is the use of Elder Deep Fiend, which might just be the best creature going right now, but you have to play it in a certain correct type of deck. You have to play it in a deck that has creatures, and you have to play it in a deck that can finish a game in an attack all of a sudden. And Bant midrange is certainly one of the decks that can flood the board with enough creatures and enough value to suddenly win if all mana and creatures of your opponent was tapped down. And that's why I think Bant midrange is one of the best decks right now. Delirium and Graves, black-green. This is also an extremely popular deck, and the value generated out of it is one of the main reasons why things like Abzan midrange are below it. It's not that Abzan midrange can't win. In fact, it often will win a split with the Delirium Graves deck. But the thing about the Delirium deck, or just Graves in general, is that when they kill your things, you just get them back over and over again. In addition to that, this deck just natively doesn't mind playing a card like Pulse of Marasa, and it has no problem jamming a Rex Sage or two in there to protect itself. And in fact, it's incentivized to do it because Sphinx's tutelage is such a common thing to see. It's probably in 11% of all games, from according to my statistics. And so if in 11% of the games you just lose if you don't have Reclamation Sage, it's nice to have the ability to play a Reclamation Sage and just get it back over and over again. And as a result, despite the fact that the power level of the Delirium Graves deck actually feels a little bit low sometimes, it has so much grind factor and can go so long that I actually think it is one of the best decks in the format. Number 2, I've chosen my own Temur Emerge Crush deck, which is a ramp deck, as the number 2. I don't think anybody else is actually playing this deck, but in my experience, it's just very, very, very good in the meta. It will randomly just wipe boards and swing for lethal. It very reliably casts Ulamog without even trying to. What this deck's actually trying to do is cast Elder Deep Fiend over and over and over again, or Crush of Tentacles over and over and over again. There have been times where I've cast the same 2 Elder Deep Fiends off each other with Pulse of Marasa or Grapple from the Past like 5 times in a row. And that's really the way this deck wins. But just the fact that it can incidentally Ulamog is actually where the strength of this deck is. Anybody that's fought against Ulamog knows that it's a garbage card to lose to. But when you're playing a deck that just throws it in there just maybe you'll cast it and win the game anyway, that's kind of where you want to be. And since you can take so many turns off in this format against such a huge percentage of the meta that's playing control, or even dirtily mid-range decks where you don't have to play something relevant every single turn, this deck is hugely punishing in the meta. And as a result, it's number 2. But despite that, at 78% win percentage, the very first deck tech that I did in this format was White Humans, and it remains one of the best in the format. White Humans is absurd, and even White-Green Humans is fine. If you want to run Hamlet Captain and throw a Tireless Tracker in there just because, that actually works. White Humans is just fast enough and can make its tiny creatures so big so fast, and even more relevant. Maybe the most relevant thing of all is the fact that it plays Collective Effort. Collective Effort destroys an enchantment. So it just destroys tutelage incidentally, but it also +1/+1s your entire team. But it also kills giant creatures with 4 power or greater. This deck consistently is the best deck in the format. And it got this answer to everything that was suddenly a problem. It's able to make itself even bigger. Always Watching, Gideon, Collective Effort, Hamlet Captain, Renowned Consul's Lieutenant. It makes the creatures so big so fast. And just the fact that it has an answer to tutelage on top of it, it's really silly. And White Humans absolutely continues to be the best deck in the format. Anyway, that's really all I wanted to talk about. I know this was kind of a long video, but I wanted to impart my thought process when I'm tackling a meta. And even though I don't have tons and tons and tons and tons and tons of data, I feel like I have enough data to at least impart the knowledge that I've shared today. And that's it.